Hello all. Sivananda Sarma Memorial RV College Video Lectures and ISR Initiative. SSMRV College is one of the premier institutes run by the prestigious RV group of institutions, has come up with a unique initiative to engage students at the time of this unforeseen medical emergency caused by corona outbreak. As a socially responsible institution, we would like to connect academically with students to make good the losses caused. In this connection, I, Lavanya B K of Department of Business Administration, has posted a video on subject organizational behavior and the topic learning. Please watch the video till the end and like, share with your peer groups and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Let us understand the concept learning. Learning is a need-based activity. Learning is for living, it's for endurance, and there is no end for learning. Learning is a crafted procedure which makes an individual to search for the knowledge, seek the knowledge, and integrate the knowledge for the betterment. In order to sustain, you have to learn. And moving on to the next slide, which talks about the process of learning. There you have 4 process steps: stimulus, response, motivation, and rewards. Stimulus basically are the sources or the origin points where the learning drivers will emerge. Stimulus is the major factor which makes an individual to search for the details or the knowledge, and response on the other side is the outcome which is actually expressed by a learner. Either response can be positive or negative. Motivation is the encouragement that makes an individual to keep up his learning stature, and rewards ultimately become the incentives which makes an individual to reinforce his learning stature. And moving on to the next slide, which talks about the 4 fundamental theories of learning: classical conditioning, operant conditioning, cognitive conditioning, and social learning theory or observational learning theory. So the first one, which talks about classical conditioning. In the next slide, you can see the person who has expressed the classical conditioning, Dr. Ivan Pavlov. I have inserted his picture. You can see that. Ivan Pavlov is a Russian psychologist who has expressed the theory of this classical conditioning. He believes that there are 4 major factors to a classical conditioning theory. The first one is unconditioned stimulus, unconditioned response, second one. Third one is conditioned stimulus, and fourth one is conditioned response. Basically, unconditioned response is the response that is expressed by the learner for the first time. There is no previous experience, there is no previous learning, yet you express a sort of outcome or an expression in general. That can be unconditioned response. Unconditioned stimulus on the other side is the triggerer or the motivator which you've never acquainted before, but you have encountered it for the first time and you lack details about it, you lack knowledge about it. That is unconditioned stimulus. Conditioned stimulus is the second layer of it. So on one side you have unconditioned factors, on the other side you have conditioned factors. So conditioned stimulus in the second layer talks about your acquaintance with the stimulus, any such motivator or a trigger point that you have previously encountered and you have knowledge about it, you have experience about it, and that's why you got triggered and that's why you got motivated, and that can be conditioned stimulus. Conditioned response is an opponent or a contradiction to unconditioned response, which talks about your outcome or your expression for the second time or third time, definitely not the first time. So that can be your conditioned response. So as you can see in the picture that I've inserted, Pavlov experiment with the dog, you have 3 major, the 3 involving characters probably in the experiment. the dog, the meat, and the bell. In the first picture, you can see before conditioning, where there is presence of dog and the bell. Ivan Pavlov, he rang the bell, and the dog on the other side is indifferent. It doesn't know why the bell has been rung. So that is before conditioning, where you consider the bell as neutral stimulus and the dog as non-conditioned responding. Okay, and moving to the second side, you have this before conditioned. Again, you have the dog, the constant player, and you have brought this, the third component, that is meat. So meat here is unconditioned stimulus, and the dog here started salivating. Here, the meat is considered as unconditioned stimulus and the dog started salivating, that is unconditioned response. Okay, so in the first slide, you have, in the first segment of the picture, you have the bell and the dog. The dog and bell both are indifferent. And in the second part of the picture talks about the meat and the dog, where the meat is unconditioned stimulus, yet the dog is unconditionally responding to the meat by salivating. And the third one here, the third segment of the picture talks about the three presents. All the three participants are in the play: bell, meat, and the dog. So what Ivan Pavlov has done here is, he rang the bell, he presented the meat at the same time. So what is he's trying to do? He's trying to condition the dog's mind. So once the bell is rang and the meat is also presented, sumptuous meat is also presented on the other side, the dog heard the noise or the bell ringing sound at the same time. It evidenced the meat before it and he started salivating, and then you call it as unconditioned response, because the dog is trying to get acquainted with the concept of bell ringing at the same time of presence of meat. And in the fourth tile of the picture, you have after conditioning. That is, the entire experiment is jotted down. I mean, it's made into three layers. The first one is before condition, second one is during the condition, and the fourth one is after conditioning. So in the after conditioning, you have the bell and the dog, and there is no presence of meat. If you could find it there, it's not there, because Ivan Pavlov, after repeated reinforcement of presence of meat with the bell ringing, he wants to see how the dog responds when the bell is rang but meat is not present. As soon as the dog heard the bell ringing, it started salivating, because both the bell and the dog are conditioned here. You could see there, the bell is called as conditioned stimulus and the dog salivating is called as conditioned response. So that is Pavlov experiment with the dog, and this theory basically talks about the four things, that is unconditioned stimulus and response, conditioned stimulus and response. Moving on to the second theory. It's called as operant conditioning theory, which is proposed by the person B.F. Skinner, a psychologist. I have inserted his picture, you can see that. So according to B.F. Skinner, operant conditioning actually has three major participants in it. One is neutral operators, second one is reinforcers, and the third one is punishers. Skinner believed that neutral operants are nothing but the indifferent factors in the environment present around us, which neither increases the response nor decreases the response. They're just there, present, not causing any sort of minor changes in human beings or any creature for that matter. And reinforce on the other side, which is a second participant according to Skinner in the learning concept, is reinforcing or reinforcement, which either can be positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement. Basically, reinforcement is done in order to strengthen a response. If you repeatedly do something, repeatedly enforce something, that becomes empowered. In order to empower some sort of response, you got to reinforce it, and that he believes the second component in order to learn. And the third component in order to learn, according to Skinner, is punishers. So if any such response or an outcome is not desirable, you got to weaken the behavior, you got to weaken the response, and you choose punishment, you bring it into place, you punish a concerned person or a concerned behavior or anything for that matter in order to weaken it. So that becomes your punishers. Here in the operant conditioning, in order to make it a lot clear, Skinner has conducted a small experiment with pigeons. It's called as the pigeon experiment, where pigeons are kept in a box. As you can see in the next slide, you can see the pigeon operant chamber. The pigeon is actually put into a small box where it has a key on before it, and then you have a food hopper. On the other side you have red and green, those are the lights. He has made the pigeons learn the concept of this operant conditioning altogether, where pigeons here are used in order to indicate if there is any missile of the opponents or the other opponents, I mean to say enemies' missiles. If at all it's coming on the other side opposite to it, it immediately turns the key on, or it immediately presses the key. And if it identifies the missile is not belonging to them but the opponent's missile, the pigeon will be served food. I mean to say, what he's trying to say here is, if you identify the things at the right time, if you're very you take the stimulus into consideration, and you choose the right things and you express the right things, you will be rewarded with something. But here in this case, key is turned on at the right time, pigeon is identified at the right time because it's very keen observer, and it will be given food. So he has done this project pigeon, or the pigeon experiment, using them to check how the three concepts, that is neutral, operants, reinforcers and punishers, can make some sort of learning into pigeons, and the same is actually applicable to human beings as well. So that is the project pigeon conducted by B.F. Skinner, talks about operant conditioning. And moving on to the next one you have is cognitive mapping theory. So moving on to the next theory, which is a cognitive mapping theory, or simply cognitive theory. It's actually established by Edward Tolman, an American psychologist. Edward Tolman believed that in order to be logical, you must have the ability to think, process the knowledge that you have, and come up with various solutions. Trial and error are the basic source of your knowledge, is what he believed in. And in order to understand the cognitive mapping theory better, he has conducted a small experiment. He has conducted this experiment using rats, where there is a maze, there is a rat, and there is a cheese. It can be any other food, but here in the picture I have used is a cheese, an alluring, sumptuous food that can drive them to do anything. What he has done is, he has created a web or a maze, and he has led the rat to play. He has led the rat to go for a race, and in the process of finding the food, or in the process of searching the food, the rat encounters a lot of obstacles here and there, now and then. But eventually it ends up finding the food. So every time it is rewarded with the food, it gives it's got a lot of energy to search for better, to run faster in the race. So anything that is positively reinforced is for better, it's for strengthening, it's for empowering. And anything that is negatively reinforced at the same time, can be punishers and everything, can weaken your behavior and can make you to look for something else to become better. So that's the experiment of cognitive theory using the rat and the maze and the cheese. And the fourth theory here is actually called as social learning theory, proposed by Albert Bandura. He believes that social learning theory is basically observation based. If you want to learn, you don't have to essentially go to an institute, you don't have to essentially place yourself before something in order to learn something, you don't have to travel places. simply social learning is based on observation. Be wherever you are, you just look at the surrounding. There are so many things happening around you, and you tend to get or grab a lot of details through observations. He believed observation learning is the best sort of learning. It makes the major quotient of your learning is through observation. And that's why in the next slide I've inserted a picture of a father and a son. There is a famous saying which says, like father, like son. There is no other model which looks a lot attractive to a son's eyes than his own father. So he believes observational learning is basically simply to observe, and then it eventually just gets into your way and you learn it. And in observational learning, he featured out there are three things, that is behavior modeling, learning behavior consequences, self-reinforcement. Behavior modeling here is any such object or a person or a situation that looks very much learning related. You think, if at all I look at it, I listen to this, or I write this down, or I just observe, I learn more. So that becomes your model, and that can be called as behavior modeling, basically conceptualizing it. And the second one here is learning behavior consequences, is your trial and error. Is just you just learn something, you put into use, and that's how it becomes stronger actually. And the next one talks about self reinforcement, is basically practice it every day on a basis. The more you practice, the more you reinforce, the more empowered it becomes. So these are the three basic features of social learning according to Albert Bandura. So that's all for the video. Thank you for watching. Please like, share and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you.